My name is Zara, and right now, as you are listening to my voice, something is unfolding in the financial world that most people will completely miss. Not because the information is hidden, not because you need a special degree to understand it, but because most people are either too distracted, too afraid, or too comfortable to pay attention. And 10 years from now, they will look back at this exact moment and ask themselves one painful question. Why did I not act when I had the chance? Today, I'm going to talk to you about something that, by every historical measure, surfaces once every 50 years. A financial setup so rare, so powerful, and so misunderstood that the majority of ordinary people either panic through it or sleep through it entirely. And only a small, quiet, disciplined group of people recognize it, position themselves correctly, and change the trajectory of their financial lives forever. Now, before anything else, I want to be very clear about what this video is not. This is not a get-rich-quick promise. This is not a story about overnight success. This is not a call to empty your savings account and throw it into something volatile because a YouTube channel told you to. If that is what you are looking for, this is not the right place. What this is an honest, grounded, and deeply practical conversation about financial cycles, about timing, about patience, and about what it truly means to act fast in a way that is intelligent rather than impulsive. Let me tell you where this understanding came from for me personally, because it did not come from a classroom. Several years ago, I had a modest amount of savings. I was careful with money. I worked hard. I did not take unnecessary risks. But I was also completely frozen. Every time I thought about doing something meaningful with what I had saved, I found a reason to wait. The market felt too high. Then it felt too low. Then there was uncertainty in the news. Then there was an election. Then there was a global event. There was always something. And so I waited and waited. And in that waiting, I was not being responsible. I was being paralyzed by fear dressed up as caution. What changed everything for me was a single conversation with someone older, someone who had lived through multiple financial cycles across decades. He did not give me a stock pick. He did not tell me to buy gold or sell everything. He simply drew a wave on a piece of paper and said, "Markets move in long, slow, powerful cycles. Most people only ever experience 2 or 3 of these cycles in their lifetime. And the people who understand where they are on the wave are the people who build real, lasting wealth. Everyone else just reacts." That was the beginning of my real financial education. So today, in this video, I want to walk you through what a once-in-50-year setup actually means, what it looks like from the inside, why it is so easy to miss, what the most common and costly mistakes people make during these windows are, and what the calm, disciplined, intelligent response looks like when you find yourself standing inside one of these rare moments in financial history. We are going to move through this together across 5 parts, and I want you to stay with me all the way to the end, because the warning I have for you in the final part is perhaps the most important thing you will hear in this entire video. But we begin here, at the foundation, with one simple but profound idea. Every 50 years or so, a combination of forces aligns in the financial world in a way that creates enormous opportunity for those who are prepared and enormous loss for those who are not. These are not random events. They follow patterns, long, slow, generational patterns that are invisible if you are only looking at the last 6 months of news, but crystal clear if you step back and look at the last 100 years of economic history. Think about what happens in these cycles. You get a period of rapid expansion, prosperity, easy credit, and rising asset prices. People feel confident. They spend. they borrow, they invest aggressively. Then you get a correction, sometimes a sharp one. Prices fall, fear rises, people pull back, caution returns. And then, slowly, a new foundation is laid. Valuations reset, opportunities emerge, and the cycle begins again. But here is the critical piece that most people miss. The greatest opportunities in any 50-year cycle do not appear at the obvious moments. They do not announce themselves on the front page of every newspaper. They appear quietly, in the uncomfortable middle, when most people are still too afraid to move. And that is exactly where we are right now. I am not telling you that the path ahead is easy or guaranteed. I am telling you that the setup, the combination of conditions that historically precedes a major multi-decade wealth-building opportunity, is present right now in a way that it has not been for roughly 50 years. And if you are willing to learn, to stay calm, and to act with intention rather than impulse, this moment could define the next chapter of your financial life. We will get into exactly what this setup looks like and what to do about it in the parts that follow. But first, I want you to sit with this one truth. The people who built generational wealth did not do it by being the smartest people in the room. They did it by understanding cycles, by having the courage to act when others were frozen, and by having the patience to let time do the heavy lifting. That is the foundation. And it is where every great financial decision begins. Here is something important. A once-in-50-year setup does not look exciting from the inside. It does not feel like opportunity. It feels like confusion. It feels like uncertainty. It feels like nobody really knows what is going to happen next. And that discomfort, that collective uncertainty, is actually one of the most reliable signals that a significant turning point is near. Think about it this way. When everything is obvious, when everyone agrees that the economy is strong and assets will keep rising, prices already reflect that optimism. There is no room for extraordinary gains because everyone has already priced in the good news. But when there is genuine confusion, when intelligent people disagree, when the headlines are mixed and the mood is cautious, that is when assets are often priced for fear rather than for their true long-term value. And that gap between fear-based pricing and true long-term value is where wealth is quietly built. Right now, if you look around you, you will see several things happening simultaneously. Interest rates have gone through a dramatic and rapid shift after a long period of being extremely low. Certain asset classes have gone through painful corrections that have shaken out the impatient and the over-leveraged. There is a widespread feeling that the economy is fragile, that something could go wrong at any moment. And people who entered markets during the easy years are now questioning everything. All of these things, taken together, historically signal one thing: a reset, a repricing, a return to fundamentals. And after every major reset in financial history, a new multi-decade growth cycle has followed. Not immediately, not without pain, but reliably over time for those who stayed positioned and stayed patient. The setup I am describing is not one single event. It is a convergence. Think of it like a weather system. No single cloud creates a storm, but when temperature, humidity, wind, and pressure all align in a specific way, conditions become favorable for something powerful to develop. That is what is happening right now across multiple financial dimensions at the same time. And here is what makes this particularly significant. The last time conditions aligned in a comparable way, the decades that followed produced some of the most substantial wealth creation in modern history for those who were positioned correctly at the beginning. Not the people who waited until it was obvious, the people who acted when it was still uncomfortable. I want you to hold on to that image because in the next part, I am going to talk about the single biggest reason most people will miss this window entirely. And it has nothing to do with money. It has everything to do with psychology. This is the part of the conversation that I think matters most, because information alone is never enough. You can understand cycles perfectly. You can recognize the setup clearly, and you can still do exactly the wrong thing. Not because you are unintelligent, but because of how the human mind responds to financial uncertainty. Let me describe the most common and most costly mistake I see people make during these rare windows of opportunity. The first mistake is waiting for certainty. This is the most widespread and the most dangerous. People say to themselves, "I will invest when things become clearer. I will act when the economy stabilizes. I will move when I feel more confident." And by the time clarity arrives, by the time the opportunity becomes obvious to everyone, the best of it is already gone. The prices have risen. The easy gains have already been captured by those who moved while it was still uncomfortable. Certainty is the price you pay for missing the opportunity. That is a hard truth, but it is the truth. The second mistake is letting recent memory dominate long-term thinking. If the last 2 years have been painful in markets, if your portfolio has gone down, if you have watched friends or colleagues lose money, your brain will naturally tell you that investing right now is dangerous. This is called recency bias. Your mind overweights what just happened and underweights the much larger pattern of what historically happens next. The very pain of the recent past is part of what creates the opportunity of the near future. But recency bias makes it almost impossible to see that clearly without deliberate, disciplined effort. The third mistake is confusing activity with intelligence. When people feel uncertain, they want to do something. They want to trade, to switch, to move things around, to feel like they are in control. And all of that activity, most of the time, does nothing except generate costs, taxes, and emotional exhaustion. The intelligent response to a rare setup like this one is rarely dramatic. It is quiet. It is methodical. It is boring to watch from the outside, but it is powerful in its outcomes. The fourth mistake, and this one is deeply personal for me, is letting other people's fear become your own. When you are surrounded by people who are anxious about money, when the news is full of warnings and the conversations around you are full of worry, it is extraordinarily difficult to maintain a calm and independent perspective. I have watched people abandon perfectly sound long-term strategies because a family member was nervous, because a colleague sold everything, because the general mood in the room was fearful. And in almost every case, the people who held their ground and stayed with their plan were the ones who came out ahead. Fear is contagious, but so is discipline if you choose to surround yourself with it. The fifth mistake is thinking that acting fast means acting recklessly. The title of this video says "Act Fast," and I mean that seriously. But acting fast does not mean acting without thought. It does not mean gambling. It does not mean putting everything you have into one idea because a video on the internet told you the moment was right. Acting fast, in the context of a rare financial setup, means beginning to educate yourself now rather than later. It means making a decision about your strategy now rather than waiting for perfect conditions that will never arrive. It means taking the first step, whatever that first step looks like for your situation, now, rather than in 6 months when the window may have already begun to close. These 5 mistakes are not theoretical. They are patterns. They repeat in every major financial cycle, and the people who avoid them are not necessarily wealthier or better educated than those who fall into them. They are simply more aware, more deliberate, more willing to act against the emotional grain of the moment. In the next part, I am going to talk about what the right response actually looks like, what it means to position yourself intelligently inside this window, and how to think about building wealth in a way that is sustainable across decades, not just months. Everything we have covered so far, the cycle, the setup, the mistakes, it all leads to this question. What do you actually do? And I want to answer that question as honestly and as practically as I can, without oversimplifying and without giving you a specific prescription that ignores your personal circumstances. Because here is the truth. There is no single right answer that works for every person watching this video. What works for someone with 30 years ahead of them and a stable income looks different from what works for someone approaching retirement. What works for someone with significant savings looks different from what works for someone just beginning to build. And any voice that tells you there is one universal move to make right now, regardless of your situation, is a voice you should be cautious about. What I can give you is a framework. A way of thinking about positioning that is grounded in the principles that have guided intelligent investors across multiple generations. The first principle is this: your time horizon is your most powerful asset. If you have 10, 20, or 30 years ahead of you, the short-term volatility that frightens most people is essentially irrelevant to your outcome. What matters is not what happens in the next 6 months. What matters is what you own, how much of it you own, and how long you hold it. Time in the market, not timing the market, is the foundation of serious wealth building. And inside a once-in-50-year setup, time becomes even more powerful because you are potentially catching the early stage of a multi-decade growth cycle. The second principle is diversification with intention. This does not mean spreading your money randomly across everything you can find. It means thinking carefully about which asset classes have historically performed well coming out of the kind of reset we are currently experiencing, and allocating across them in a way that reflects your risk tolerance and your goals. Equities, real assets, productive businesses. These have been the engines of wealth creation across every long cycle in modern financial history, and they tend to reward those who are patient enough to hold through the uncomfortable early stages of a new cycle. The third principle is consistency over perfection. One of the most reliable strategies available to any ordinary person is simply to invest a fixed amount at regular intervals, regardless of what the market is doing in that moment. This approach, often called systematic investing, removes the psychological burden of trying to time the market perfectly. You buy more when prices are low and less when prices are high, automatically, without having to make a difficult emotional decision each time. Over a long period, this approach smooths out volatility and builds position in a way that is both disciplined and sustainable. The fourth principle is protecting your foundation first. Before you think about growing wealth, you need to make sure your financial foundation is secure. This means having an emergency fund that covers several months of living expenses. It means not carrying high-interest debt that is eating away at your financial base. It means having adequate protection in place so that one unexpected event does not destroy everything you are trying to build. Investing without a foundation is like building a house on sand. The structure might look impressive for a while, but it will not survive the first serious storm. The fifth principle is education as a continuous investment. The single highest returning investment you can make right now, today, regardless of your financial situation, is in your own understanding of how money works. Not in a theoretical academic sense, but in a practical, real-world sense. Understanding how markets cycle. Understanding the difference between assets and liabilities. Understanding how inflation quietly erodes purchasing power over time. Understanding the basics of compounding. These are not complicated ideas, but most people go through their entire lives without ever truly internalizing them. And that gap in understanding is what separates those who build wealth from those who merely earn it and spend it. I want to add one more thing to this part because I think it is often overlooked. Positioning yourself intelligently during a rare financial window is not just about what you buy or how much you invest. It is about who you become in the process. The habits you build, the patience you develop, the discipline you practice during uncomfortable moments. These things compound, just like money does. The person who learns to act calmly and thoughtfully during a period of market uncertainty is the same person who will be equipped to do it again in the next cycle and the one after that. You are not just making a financial decision right now. You are building a financial identity. And that identity, over a lifetime, is worth far more than any single investment you will ever make. We have come a long way together in this video. We started with the idea that we are living inside a financial setup that appears once every 50 years. We looked at what that setup actually looks like from the inside. We talked about the mistakes that cause most people to miss these windows entirely. And we walked through the principles of intelligent positioning. Now I want to end with something different. Not motivation, not encouragement. A warning. Because the most dangerous moment in any rare financial window is not the beginning, when everything is uncertain and uncomfortable. The most dangerous moment is slightly later, when things begin to improve, when confidence starts to return, when the headlines turn more positive and the mood around money begins to shift. That is when a different and perhaps more destructive kind of mistake begins to happen. When markets begin to recover, when asset prices start to rise, when the news starts to confirm what the careful and the disciplined already knew, the people who missed the early window suddenly become very interested. The caution that kept them on the sidelines transforms almost overnight into urgency. And that urgency, unchecked, leads them to do exactly what they should not do. They chase performance. They buy what has already risen dramatically. They take on more risk than they can comfortably handle because they are trying to make up for lost time. And they do this at exactly the wrong moment, near the peak of enthusiasm rather than near the foundation of recovery. This is not a theoretical warning. This pattern has repeated in every major financial cycle across the last 100 years. The people who miss the opportunity and then rush in late are often the ones who suffer the most when the cycle eventually corrects again. They bought high, driven by fear of missing out, and they sell low, driven by panic. And the cycle of poor financial decisions continues. So here is my final and most important message to you. The time to act is not when it feels safe. The time to act is not when everyone around you is excited and confident. The time to act is now, while it is still uncomfortable, while uncertainty is still in the air, while the opportunity has not yet become obvious to the crowd. And acting does not mean being reckless. It means beginning. It means taking the first step in your education if you have not already. It means reviewing your financial foundation and making sure it is solid. It means making a plan, a real, written, deliberate plan for how you are going to position yourself over the next several years. And then it means following that plan with consistency and patience, even when the news is noisy and the emotions are loud. A once-in-50-year setup is not a guarantee. Nothing in finance ever is. But it is a signal. And signals, when read correctly and acted upon with discipline, are what separate the people who talk about building wealth from the people who actually do it. You have watched this entire video. That already tells me something about you. It tells me you are serious. It tells me you are willing to invest time and understanding before you invest money in markets. That instinct is correct. Hold on to it. But do not let that seriousness become another form of paralysis. Do not let the search for more information become a substitute for action. At some point, and that point is sooner than most people think, you have to decide. You have to commit. You have to move. The window is open right now. It will not stay open forever. My name is Zara, and this is the most important financial moment of your generation. Do not sleep through it.